Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're diving into Plato's Republic.
We're talking justice, ideal societies, and all the good stuff that still makes this book a knockout punch of wisdom thousands of years later.
Thousands of years later, it's still relevant, and we're going to unpack why that is.
And we're not just skimming the surface. You'll walk away from this deep dive with insights that connect to your life today.
It's not just ancient history, right?
Not at all.
For those who haven't cracked open the Republic since college, or ever, let's set the stage.
Okay, so imagine this. Socrates, the OG philosophical rock star, is holding court with some buddies, debating what makes a society truly just. But this isn't some polite philosophical chit-chat over tea and biscuits. Socrates, in his own hilarious way, dismantles every single definition they throw at him.
You gotta admire the guy's guts, right? Who else would crash a party and just start picking apart everyone's worldview with such wit?
It's amazing, and that's where Plato's genius shines through. He uses this dialogue format, this back and forth, to make you, the listener, an active participant in the search for truth. It's like he's saying, don't just take my word for it, think for yourself.
Okay, so let's talk about this search for truth. At its core, the Republic is a deep dive into justice, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, but here's the catch. Plato doesn't hand you a neat little definition of justice. Instead, he throws you right into the fire of debate.
Trial by fire. I love it. So where do we even begin?
Well, it all starts with Cephalus. He defines justice as simply telling the truth and paying your debts. Sounds straightforward enough.
It does.
But Socrates, being Socrates, he pokes a hole in that pretty quickly.
Oh, I bet he did. I can practically hear the gears turning in his head. What happens next?
Well, Cephalus' son, Polemarchus, steps up to the plate. He says, no justice is all about helping your friends and harming your enemies. Now, this definition might resonate with some people. It seems practical in a way.
It's how we often operate in the real world, right? Look out for your inner circle and watch out for the rest.
Exactly. But as Socrates masterfully points out, what happens when your friends aren't actually good people? Does loyalty trump morality? And should justice really involve causing harm? These questions get at the heart of how we define fairness and morality.
It's easy to spout those simplistic definitions, but then Socrates forces you to confront the messy reality of actually applying them.
Precisely. And that brings us to a real game changer. Thrasymachus. This guy comes barging in with an argument as shocking as it is relevant even today. He basically says might makes right. Justice is nothing more than what the strong impose on the weak.
Okay, I have to admit that's a chillingly accurate take on how things often play out, both historically and in our own world.
It's uncomfortable, isn't it? Plato forces us to confront this brutal reality that many have believed throughout history. It makes you ask yourself, is that really all justice boils down to? Is there a higher standard we should be striving for?
It makes you question everything, especially in today's world where we're drowning in information, different perspectives, constantly battling it out. It's like Plato's urging us to see through the noise, to think critically about power structures both in society and our own lives.
Exactly, and that's what makes the Republic such a mind-blowing read. It's not about handing you the right answer. It's about igniting that fire in your mind, that hunger to engage, to question, and ultimately to define truth for yourself. So we've established that defining justice is no walk in the park.
It's tough stuff.
But Plato doesn't leave you hanging. He doesn't just want to deconstruct. He wants to build something better.
Because what's the point of picking everything apart if you're not going to try and put it back together in a more meaningful way?
Exactly, and that's where his concept of the ideal republic comes in. Socrates argues that to grasp justice in individuals, we need to zoom out to see how it functions on a larger scale in a society.
It's like he's building a utopia from the ground up, right? Using this ideal society as a model for understanding individual justice.
You got this ideal republic is meticulously structured, with each part designed to create a harmonious whole. Picture in a city-state with three main classes. You've got the philosopher-kings at the top.
Philosopher-kings? Okay, I gotta admit, that sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. Can you imagine philosophers running things in the real world?
Well, Socrates argues that philosophers are the most qualified to lead because they're driven by a love of wisdom, this insatiable desire for truth. They're not motivated by power or personal gain, which, let's face it, is a refreshing change, right?
I'll say it's a far cry from how most leaders operate, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. Now, of course, the idea of philosopher-kings is open to interpretation, but what's fascinating here is the underlying principle: a just society needs leaders who prioritize truth and virtue above all else.
So it's not necessarily about philosophers literally running the show, but about having leaders who embody those philosophical ideals.
Precisely. And it's not just about the leaders. In Plato's Republic, Every citizen plays a vital role, contributing based on their unique talents and abilities. He divides them into three groups: the philosopher-kings, the guardians who protect the state, and the producers who provide for its material needs.
It's like a well-oiled machine, everyone working together in harmony. But hold on, there's a catch, isn't there? Plato was also a big believer in censorship, right? He had some pretty strong opinions about the role of art and storytelling in his ideal society.
This is where things get really interesting. Plato understood the power of art to influence people's hearts and minds, especially young minds. He argued that even stories and music should be carefully controlled, designed to promote virtue and discourage vice. No corrupting influences allowed.
Wait, so no heavy metal for the guardians in training? That's a tough sell, Plato.
Right. But think about it. His concern about the power of art, especially on young minds, is something we're still grappling with today.
It's a debate that rages on, isn't it? Especially in our digital age where we're bombarded with information and imagery from every direction. Are there limits to freedom of expression, especially when it comes to potentially harmful content?
Exactly, and Plato was ahead of his time in recognizing just how deeply art can shape our perceptions and values. He even criticizes Homer's epics, which were like the blockbusters of his day, for depicting the gods behaving badly. Remember Zeus throwing those epic tantrums? Not exactly a model citizen.
Okay, I get it. But it still feels a bit, I don't know, restrictive, doesn't it? Who gets to decide what art is acceptable in this perfect world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Plato doesn't give us all the answers. But what he does do is force us to confront this tension between freedom of expression and the common good. It's a debate that's more relevant than ever.
It makes you wonder, if Plato were alive today, what would he make of the internet? It's like this wild west of information and entertainment with very few rules.
It would be fascinating to pick his brain, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But let's not forget, Plato's vision isn't just about sunshine and rainbows. He also explores the darker side of human nature and the potential for even the most ideal societies to decay over time.
It's like he's giving us a cautionary tale, a reminder that utopia is a fragile thing.
Exactly. He outlines 4 other forms of government, each more flawed than the last, to illustrate how things can go wrong. He calls them democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and shudder tyranny. Each one represents a step further away from justice, a descent into corruption.
Okay, so paint us a picture. What do these less than ideal societies look like?
Well, imagine a society obsessed with honor and military glory above all else. That's democracy for you. Then there's oligarchy, where wealth reigns supreme and money talks, but nobody else does. And then there's democracy, which Plato saw as vulnerable to chaos and mob rule, driven by fleeting passions rather than reason.
I'm sensing a pattern here, and it's not pretty. It seems like each of these forms of government is ultimately driven by self-interest rather than the common good.
You hit the nail on the head. They're all focused on power, wealth, or the satisfaction of individual desires at the expense of justice and virtue. It's like a slow-motion train wreck.
And the grand finale, the ultimate train wreck, is tyranny, where one person holds absolute power and everyone else suffers.
Exactly. Tyranny is the ultimate perversion of justice, where the ruler's desires become the only law. And here's where Plato gets really insightful. He draws a parallel between the city and the individual soul. Just as a city can be just or unjust, so too can an individual.
So you're saying there's an inner republic within each of us, that the state of our society is a reflection of the state of our individual souls.
Precisely, and each form of government corresponds to a particular type of person. The tyrannical soul, according to Plato, is the most corrupt and miserable of all. But here's the good news: we have a choice.
We can choose to cultivate a just soul even if we're living in an unjust society.
Exactly, and this brings us to one of Plato's most powerful and enduring images, an allegory that has captivated readers for centuries: the allegory of the cave.
Okay, I'm ready. Take us into the cave. Okay, hit me with it. What's this cave all about?
Imagine this. You're chained inside a cave along with other prisoners. You spent your whole life staring at a blank wall. Behind you, a fire burns, and between the fire and you, there's this pathway where people walk, carrying objects. You can't see them directly, only the shadows they cast on the wall.
So they're trapped in this world of shadows, believing it's the only reality. It's kind of like that movie, The Truman Show.
Exactly. Now imagine one of the prisoners breaks free. He stumbles out of the cave into the blinding sunlight. It's overwhelming at first. He can barely see, but gradually his eyes adjust. He sees the world as it truly is. The sun, the source of all light and life. And he realizes those shadows were just pale imitations of the real thing.
Talk about a reality check. It makes you wonder, what are the caves in our own lives? Those things that prevent us from seeing the full picture, the deeper truths.
That's the question Plato wants us to ask ourselves. Are we content with the shadows on the wall, or are we willing to embark on that journey out of the cave, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it challenges everything we thought we knew?
It's a powerful image, that's for sure. It makes you realize how much we take for granted, how easily we can get stuck in our own limited perspectives.
And that's what makes the allegory of the cave so enduring. It's a timeless reminder that the pursuit of truth is a journey, not a destination. There's always more to learn, more to discover, more to question.
It's almost like Plato is saying, hey, don't just take my word for it. Go out and find your own truth.
Exactly. And he gives us the tools to do just that. He teaches us to think critically, to question our assumptions, to never stop seeking wisdom.
So as we emerge from this deep dive into Plato's Republic, what's the key takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I want you to remember the allegory of the cave. Ask yourself, have you stepped out into the light? What shadows might you be mistaking for reality? What would it take for you to break free?
Powerful stuff. Plato might have written this centuries ago, but his ideas still pack a punch.
Yeah.
So to our listeners, if you want to really get your mind blown, I highly recommend checking out the Republic for yourself. Trust me, you won't regret it. Until next time, keep asking those big questions and keep diving deep.